Всем привет, меня зовут Михаил Родин, мы здесь
Hi, my name is Mikhail Rodin. Here we are talking about millennia that literally lay under your feet.
Как вы себе представляете
How do you imagine the Vladimir-Suzdal part of Russia just before the Mongols came? A question like this will normally make you think of impossible forests, where the Russian princes hiding from the wild nomads.
русские князья? А что если я вам скажу,
How about this? The Vladimir-Suzdal countryside looked pretty much the same as I can see it now from my car. Endless plow fields and many huge villages are located one next to another, approximately every other mile.
2 километра. Если я скажу, что здесь процветало сельское хозяйство,
What if I say that farming was blooming here, there was no forest and the population density was higher than today? This is incredible new data that we have uncovered only in the past 20 years, thanks to the fieldwork of the Institute of Archaeology here in the Vladimir-Suzdal countryside. I'm on the way now to answer the question of how it is possible to get all of this information by walking plow fields and what's new about ancient Russian history.
Suzdal Apolyia is an agricultural part in the area of modern Vladimir, Russia. From Moscow, you can reach it in about 4 hours. What we see here now is the typical Russian agrarian province with its endless fields. There is little left from the medieval times outside the old settlements, but even inside you can mainly see the 18th and the 19th century churches. We used to think this typical landscape was only formed recently, and in the medieval period there was a dense forest where the Slavs fled to take cover from the nomads. In today's Russian history textbooks, you can read something like that. Here it is right on this page. Northeast Russia was the most remote outskirts of the Russian state. Impenetrable thickets saved it from the enemy invasion. Another one. From the middle of the 12th century, the influx of people increased. The farmers moved there, hiding from the invasion of the Cumans. And that's okay, because science is always one step ahead of the textbooks. The recent studies allow us to change this view significantly. In reality, the historical process was much more turbulent and had a different nature.
Исследования палеоботаников, изучение спорово-пыльцевых разрезов показывает, что Apolyia становится Apolyiem.
Paleobotany studies such as spore palm profiles demonstrate that Apolyia had become what it was later in the 9th, 10th centuries AD already, as deforestation occurs at this very time. Forests were replaced with the open space plow fields. This process reaches its apex in the 12th century AD, when Apolyia was even more deforested than it is today. The forest was cut down. This open space was unusual for the forest belt of the European part of Russia, and it was farmed. This data is objective paleobotany and not simply an archaeological reconstruction. This is solid science. In other words, it was the fertile soils of Apolyia that attracted people here and not the need to hide from the nomads. Moreover, the rich North territory was easily reachable for the fur trade, and the Volga trade route was nearby. We can see a completely different picture for the Slavs who lived in Apolyia. This vastness was densely packed with huge villages. Only 5 steps back, there is just a plow field, but now we can see the hard stones. Here's a bottom piece, and we are on the village's outskirts. In the past 20 years, archaeologists have discovered over 400 settlements that densely cover Apolyia. We have discovered 330 settlements of the 12th, 13th centuries AD. Their total area is approximately 30,000 acres, but only about 33% of the total area has been studied. We can assume their overall number may reach 1,000 settlements and their total area about 86,000 acres. In other words, Apolyia could reach the area of 25 towns the size of medieval Vladimir. There was a village every square mile. This is an unusually high settlement density, abnormal for the medieval Russia and the whole Europe. This was possible due to high soil productivity, and people realized that and used its full potential. So, what has actually happened? Is there another twist in our understanding of the past? Are archaeologists rewriting it yet another time? No, nothing like that. Science is moving ahead. There's new data that helps us better understand some isolated episodes from our past. Let's get to how this is happening.
Here they are, the typical sites of Suzdal Apolyia. What do you think about this place? Every average person would say, in the middle of nowhere. But in reality, this is a huge and important archaeological site. Let's have a look.
The scale of this project is unbelievable. 20 years of work, 172,000 acres covered by surveys, over 16,000 individual findings, over 80,000 pottery sherds, 420 settlements. Incredibly difficult methods of total territory coverage. All this is the effort of the Suzdal Archaeological Expedition headed by Nikolai Makarov and his team of 9 people. It is my duty to introduce them. We should know the heroes who bring the forgotten past of Russia back to life.
Мы идем по тому месту, где находится могильник Шекшова, и рядом с ним находится огромное поселение.
We're walking through the Shekshovo grave field, which is located near the largest settlement of Suzdal, Apolyia. The area of the settlement is 27 acres. We cannot see any burial mounds on the modern surface. We can only see how the landscape has changed. It is hard to believe that a huge cemetery has disappeared from the landscape. There is nothing on the surface. Meanwhile, the 7-year-long excavation project yielded incredible materials, including the famous axe with royalty inscriptions. These fields were being plowed for the past several centuries. A cultural layer like this is usually called mixed among archaeologists. There is no stratigraphy with layers that clearly follow each other in chronological order, because plows and heavy machines have mashed everything up many times. However, there is still evidence of the intense life of the pre-Mongol period.
Here is a cultural layer, even though it's plowed and mixed. I have just set down the nail purpose and see it decorate pottery sherd. There are 2 more pieces, small but informative for specialists who can date them. Let's look in some more. Here is a burnt hard stone. Here is a bone and piece of charcoal. Archaeologists call it the meditation field. If you're upset, just come here and record ceramics with a GPS.
Oh, here's a finding. It's a bead, just as we want it. Now, I need to number it and record its location with a GPS. We cannot simply collect it from the area of 37 acres, because we won't be able to understand it and explain its development through time. Precise recording of locations is the methodological foundation. You do not even need to excavate it, as it is enough to map all findings from the surface precisely, and the whole new medieval world will open up. On these maps, we can see various periods colored differently. Here on the left, we can see the locations of some handmade pottery sherds in this area.
существуют и используются в X – начале XI века.
They're dated back to the 10th and 11th centuries AD. We can see various objects of the same period untouched by plowing and excavations. They're dated by the presence of glass beads, some types of knives, and cloth decorations. But there are also dates revealed by the radiocarbon method. This information allows us to date it back to the 11th century AD. As we can see, the zone of high material density on the surface intersects well with the built area. We can see the same excavation unit on the right image, but materials are dated to the 12th century. The ceramic material is made with the wheel here, and we can see a completely different picture. All pits and objects are located in a different part of the unit and are oriented differently. Ceramic sherds are also located above the objects.
Не распространяется как лепной по всему раскопу, а также концентрируется в одной зоне. Этого материал очень четко привязан к своим объектам.
So plowing has not changed the location of ceramic sherds critically, and plowing does not explain it. It doesn't move one type of ceramics, leaving another one in its place. Despite the many centuries of plowing, we can still see the site's planography. Even though we've lost its stratigraphy, we can easily split materials and see how the village was changing through time. In other words, we can reconstruct where the boundaries of the settlement were placed centuries ago. We can see how the village was changing. It was being expanded, contracted, and moved from place to place. Moreover, once a map showing the distribution of the findings is combined with a magnetometry map, it's possible to map the streets of the medieval village. Here, we can see how the magnetic map combines with the distribution map. We can see these straight lines, which are most likely boundaries of a manor, possibly even a palisade. But we have to excavate it to be sure. We can see how the finds are organized. There are various categories of findings, including weapons, keys, and fragments of amphoras, which are marked differently on this map. We can see areas that are probably connected to a house. They're located here in the corner. We see various findings in this corner, like spindle whorls that women lost after spinning. We believe this is an elite house, so elite and people attached gathered here, losing many things. Here in this corner, a household part was located with a few shed-like buildings and an empty yard. Once I presented this to school kids. I needed to explain the difference between city and village. I used a typical illustration from the city of Novgorod. While presenting, I realized that the same thing was happening in our sites. We have the same typical layout. Here is an inner yard, here is the living part. Surely we don't have any wood, so we do not know anything about the construction of the building. Was it a single-story or a multi-story building? We need to excavate it to check if there was any basement there. Still, we can probably see it on the magnetic map. And there is the household part around it. Here we are, all parts are there. Really unexpected. We have an original archaeological map of a building from Novgorod, and its reconstruction is very similar to what we have in the site, right? Thanks to archaeologists, we know how our ancestors lived many centuries ago, how their everyday life was organized, where they rested, where their animals were pastured. All of that is just by analyzing findings from a plowed field. But imagine if before archaeologists, someone with a metal detector were to dig around here. We are on the site of national importance, and we can see these fresh holes left by modern robbers. This happened earlier this spring, in March probably. This is big, big trouble. There are not as many of them this year. This one's the third. And we used to have much more of these before. So we believe the locals have learned to appreciate these sites and kick out all the treasure hunters. It's important because it will be difficult to describe the site systematically if we lose everything but ceramic sherds. The majority of metal objects are coins, female decorations, parts of weapons. In other words, they're objects that characterize the ancient Russian culture. Without metal findings, we have these poor Slav women, which weren't in fact that poor as our high school textbooks depict them. It is hard to overcome this image.
So we think of these people as a poor people, like women without any finery, because of robbers, right?
Well, this would be an overstatement, but as a figure of speech, yes, you could say that. By collecting all metal objects, modern robbers cut off any information about everyday life, especially the social organization, religion, culture, and trade relationships of the medieval Suzdal Apolyia. Remembering that Apolyia is the most studied part of the medieval Russian countryside, any loss is dramatic. For this reason, archaeologists carefully study every object. And while looking poor, many of them have incredible stories behind them. Here, we have an unusual pendant, a Scandinavian-type amulet which is typical for the 10th, early 11th centuries. They're clear markers of the Scandinavian culture, which are also known from Gniezdovo and the cemetery of Pskov. The outstanding sites that yielded the Scandinavian culture. Here, we have a second finding after the Uvarov's excavation in the early 20th century. It came from an unfortified village of the 11th, 12th centuries, as opposed to the cultural layer of the 10th century. Perhaps it is related to families who are somehow related to the Scandinavians. They had lived in large villages of the 10th and 11th centuries, and then moved to live at smaller sites. These findings from Apolyia are entirely changing our ideas about the Russian countryside. It was not poor, primitive, or isolated from the world. We have here some pieces of amphoras, like this one, the North Pontic type. This is crucially important, as this demonstrates the long-distance trade of the medieval Russians. Such amphoras didn't travel empty. They were used to bring wine and oil. Wine could be used for liturgic purposes or for personal consumption. In any case, its presence indicates the high income of the buyer. Apolyia tells us a completely new story about the life of warriors, of the princely squad and their manners. This is a stirrup fragment. It had a hole to attach it to the saddle, and the bottom part was for a rider's feet. Quite often, stirrups were finely decorated, including this one, decorated with bronze wire and then varnished. It looks poor now, but we should understand, what we see today as black and rusty originally was shiny steel, almost silver-like. Bronze wire shined just like gold. In other words, it's a nice, beautiful thing. And it's some proper ammunition for a horse. So, 20 years of research done by the Institute of Archaeology have opened for us a new page of the history of Northeastern Russia. We still have tons of questions, but in general, the picture is clear. In the 9th century AD, the Slavs had come here and drastically changed the landscape, turning the endless forest into agricultural land. It is hard to say just from whence they came, but we know they have maintained connections to northeastern Russia and later in the 11th century AD with the south of Russia. The colonization of northeastern Russia was initially a spontaneous process. We do not see any evidence for state-driven colonization. There are no fortified settlements, and there is no regularity in the settlement distribution. The process looks spontaneous, and the regular people drove it, the middle class, the smerds, or free tenants, villagers, we can call them differently. Anyway, there weren't any state administrators. However, the state follows the people, and the colonizers did not separate from the state. They could not distance themselves from the metropolises in Suzdal, Novgorod, and Kiev. So the state laid its hand over this network of settlements. The axes of state regalia appear already at the end of the 10th century, which indicates state control, but we still do not see any fortified settlements. Perhaps the process was peaceful, with not much violence. At least, we do not see any evidence for violence. Towns were not dominating the area. Many villages had areas comparable to the town of Suzdal. Initially, the Slavs had occupied riverbanks, but something changed in the beginning of the 12th century AD. Small villages and standalone manors appear in watersheds and hilltops. This is an upper part of a ravine. Houses were built right here, and we have found a sword pommel, Scandinavian ornaments. On the other side of the ravine, the buildings of the 12th century were also located. The manors were located symmetrically around the ravine. The region had become one of the most populated areas of Eastern Europe. As a result, the local princes became more powerful, as they could quickly draw many swordsmen. During the peaceful time, swordsmen lived in the local manors, making village life more diverse. We are beginning to understand just how complex the elite was. We are discovering the elite manors. There are about 30 settlements known with elite houses. An elite residence can be identified by weapons, writing devices, and some other categories of Christianity-related objects.
Предметов, связанных с письменностью, некоторых категорий христианских вещей. Выясняется, что ее происхождение, в общем, это не вот какая-то старая аристократия, представители старой элиты, которые, так сказать, связаны с...
We're confident now that these were not old aristocracy from 9th and 11th centuries, but rather people that were brought by the prince and received land for their service. The intensity of life became slower right after the Mongols' invasion. The number of settlements decreased by about 1/3 of the original number. Apolyia could not recover after it had been devastated by Batu Khan.
На этом фоне понятно и перемещение главных политических центров в Москву, в Тверь.
It explains why political centers were moved to Moscow and Tver. As Apolyia was devastated, being the most vulnerable area. As a center of political power, Apolyia was also a target for the Mongols.
Разрушения от монгольских отрядов, которые здесь периодически появлялись. Так что вот археология позволяет, значит, увидеть этот процесс, значит, сначала роста.
So archaeology shows this process of growth to a complete decline. Moreover, archaeology has allowed us to understand how complex life was in ancient Russia. We know about the relations between towns and villages, between princes and regular people, the lifestyle and connections of the villagers. 20 years of work have already changed our understanding of life in this part of Russia. But the scientists from the Institute of Archaeology will not stop.
Я всегда говорю, что археология – это наука будущего. И побывав в таких
I'm always saying that archaeology is a science of the future. I get even more convinced each time I am visiting an expedition like this one. It's incredible how much new information archaeologists can get from the only 40 centimeters thick cultural layer, which has been plowed for centuries for horse-drawn plows and machines. Despite the plowing, archaeologists are still reconstructing the structure of the miner, located on the nowadays field. Which makes a common argument of modern black excavators or grave robbers totally insidious. They claim they do not visit any archaeological sites and simply collect stuff from the surface. Metal artifacts are coins related to the economy and trade, ornaments which signify ethnicity and worldviews, everyday objects which are associated with the daily life of the ancient people. All these things have already been collected from the surface. We lost this information forever. It's a miracle that archaeologists can still find ways to study the past with so little information left. The field season is only beginning, and we are going to see lots of exciting stuff. This is a video blog of the Institute of Archaeology. My name is Mikhail Rodin. See you.